Good morning and welcome back to Coffee Break.
So we are still celebrating National Poetry Month.
Because it's still April.
Yep.
If you're like me, you've kind of always been intimidated by poetry. Like, I don't necessarily avoid it, but I don't really seek it out either. I just feel like it's so high-minded, I don't really get it, you know?
Okay. No, I can understand how it's intimidating. Yeah, but I don't know. If you're like me, then you want to help introduce people to the idea that the fact that poetry doesn't have to be high-minded. Because I think, like, reading poetry is like playing a sport or like learning a musical instrument or something. Like, it's rare to find a person who can't benefit from it. You know, it always enhances your life in some respect. So, I don't know, like, I love April with getting people thinking about poetry because there are lots of people who don't seek it out and everything.
Right. Yeah. So, do you have tips that can help me, like, not be so intimidated and worried about, like, the Emperor's New Clothes problem, you know? Like, thinking, oh no, what if I don't understand this poem? What does that say about my intelligence?
Why, yes, I do. So my first tip was actually just don't be intimidated.
Okay.
So if you could just stop that, that's great. No, I mean, I don't know. I feel like you kind of have to abandon your preconceptions, you know, if you're one of those people who is just like apprehensive about approaching poetry. Because, you know, you can read a poem without paying attention to the meter or, you know, the rhyme scheme or the imagery. You know, you don't have to focus on all of the different elements. Like, it's fine if you want to, but I don't know, you can just read a poem and enjoy it and think about it. And even if you don't know what it means, like, that's perfectly fine.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know. I think just like going in with as low expectations as you can. Just don't expect too much of yourself, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not intimidated. I want to get started. How do I find poetry that I might like?
So what I usually do is like I will pick up some anthologies, either like the ones that I currently own or like go to a library. And yeah, try and get something that has like all different kinds of poetry in it. And then just kind of skim through, you know, like, I don't know, I usually read a couple poems by each poet that's in the anthology. And so like that way you kind of get a sense of like which poets you like, what kind of style you like, if you're really into sonnets, if you like longer poems. And yeah, you start to get a sense of like, you know, what things you're really drawn to, what you're not, and like it is perfectly fine to just abandon the things that you're not interested in. You know, you might find only one kind of poem or one writer in an anthology that you like, and like that's okay, you know?
Yeah, because there's so much variety in poetry, right? Like, I'm not going to like everything I come across.
Exactly. It's like, you know, you're not going to like every single book that you read.
Right.
You know, it's the same sort of thing.
So I've heard that kind of a way to get into feeling poetry and reading it is to try reading it out loud. To kind of, I guess it slows yourself down. So I did actually try this, and I felt like it really helped me not breeze past everything.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes you'll, you know, just kind of skim over it, or like your brain will kind of shut off halfway and you're just like eye scanning it.
Right.
And you don't even realize it.
Right.
But yeah, I think like, I don't know, maybe listening to a recording or yeah, just reading it out loud yourself, like it really helps you to absorb what is actually being said.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I feel like when I was testing this kind of reading out loud, I think I noticed that in poetry, especially a short poem, like every single word is important, which is why you need to read it slowly, I guess. So if you breeze past stuff, then you're missing a lot.
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes I tend to get tongue-tied. So like for me, reading poetry out loud, like to myself, is kind of like I'll stumble over something.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, if that happens to you, like that's fine. Just, you know, be patient, read that line over again, you know.
Yeah, or there's actually a lot of recordings of especially classic poems out there, so you can just Google it and see what you can find.
Tom Hiddleston reading E.E. Cummings, I'm just saying.
There's some David Tennant reading Shakespeare sonnets, I'm pretty sure.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fun. See, tons of good stuff.
We
to check
highly
out.
recommend British readers.
So I guess when you find a poem or a poet that really speaks to you, you know, just maybe sort of reflect on it and ask yourself, like, why am I drawn to this? Why do I like it? You know, sometimes it's just the way the words sound, or like you'll find a cool phrase in there. And sometimes it's like, oh man, like I really needed to hear that at this point in my life or something. You know, and then you can start looking at like, you know, the imagery and like the way it's broken up and everything like that and how that contributes to it. I mean, you absolutely don't have to look at the separate elements. You can just enjoy it as itself, I think. But yeah, I mean, that's what I like about poetry. There's no wrong way to do it.
Sometimes if I come across poetry, then I find myself reading it multiple times. And I think initially that was like, okay, I feel like I didn't get this. I need to read it again. But then I enjoyed reading it multiple times.
Yeah, I do too. Like even my favorite poems, you know, the ones that I feel like I've got a good sense of, I still like rereading them because I feel like I pull something new from it every single time, you know. Like, I think poetry has a really great way of surprising the reader. Like, you know, the different images and phrases, and I don't know, I mean, it's fun. Like, you don't exactly know where it's going, and you just kind of let yourself be kind of like taken along for the ride. So that's one of my favorite things about it. So I think that's great. Yeah, you see, you get this.
I'm getting it. Here's another thing that sort of confuses me. If I want to read more poetry, like, do you typically sit down kind of the same time that you might read a novel, but you decide to pick up an anthology or something instead? Or do you read poetry kind of in different settings than you would read a novel?
Yeah, I can't, because like I can sit down and read a novel for like an hour or so, you know, and that'll be fine. But like with poetry, I would get really bogged down, I think.
For that amount of time.
Yeah, like I'll usually just read a few poems at once and kind of like reflect on them and then be like, okay, and then just kind of like take that extra time and like digest it more. You know, I think like poetry has just a lot of it like packed in really tight.
Right.
And so I like to read a few of them and then unpack it all. But I don't know. I mean, maybe there are people who can sit down and read poetry like a novel. I am not one of them. I think if you're just starting out, you know, maybe just reading like a poem every once in a while just to kind of get yourself comfortable with it. I think that would be perfectly fine. I certainly don't think you need to like dive in with everything you've got.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
I've heard of different websites. I think one of them is Poem a Day. And
By Knopf?
Possibly, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I get those emails.
So you can just sign up as a way to start reading poetry and get a poem every day sent to your inbox.
Yeah, it is nice. I mean, you know, whether you like read a lot of poetry or are just starting to get the hang of it, like I think that's a good way to do it.
We actually just came out with this book of poetry called Night Guard, and I was looking through it to, you know, get better at reading poetry and practicing, and I feel like this is a really great book to start with because all of the poems are short and they're accompanied by beautiful illustrations. So I think it's just a great place to, it's easy to kind of read one and move on if it doesn't stick with you, but there's also nice variety. So I found several in here that I really, really liked.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and there are lots of like other kind of like poetry introduction books out there, you know, like good ways to kind of wade into it. So I mean, if you're reading one of those or if you're reading any poetry for the month of April, let us know in the comments or on Twitter. We would love to hear what you are up to.
So we are actually off next week. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Did you know people wash hedgehogs with toothbrushes?